a young guy in a gray shirt staring at me.
She's very pretty, isn't she?
What are you doing in Athens?
I'm a tour guide.
You're American.
You believe it?
You can ask him yourself. He's going to show us around the flea market Sunday.
What do you do for a living, sir?
I look after people's savings. Hey, why don't you join us for dinner?
So, what'd you think?
Wouldn't trust him to mow my lawn.
Mr. Dunleavy?
No. I think you get the wrong one.
I represent some very unhappy clients who invested their money with you. You gotta be more careful who you do business with.
I thought you said no one would follow us.
We gotta get out of here right away.
We need new passports, new identities.
I have a friend. He might know somebody that could help you out.
You would do that? I'd certainly make it worth your while.
It's not about the money. It's all over the news. If you turn yourself in,
They'll arrest you as an accomplice. Truth is, we're joined at the hip. I get caught, I take you down. You get caught, you turn me in.
those people that are after him, what did he do?
He killed someone. Why would you lie for him?
I didn't do it for him.
What the hell's going on?
Thinks they recognized her.
All right, why don't you lay off her?
Don't you ever speak to me like that again.
Or what? How much did you know?
Chester!
Where is he? What have you done to him?
You should have killed me when you had the chance.
Now look at you, a real criminal.
With Two Faces of January, in a nutshell, can you describe the film in thematic terms?
Well, I think the thing that thematically speaks to me is how people can love each other and destroy each other at the same time, that we all have it in us to have incredible acts of kindness and compassion and tenderness, and yet sometimes the very next instant to turn on that person or compete with them. And really, for example, the story between the two men is like the father and the son, and the idea that you can admire another man, but you always want to be better than them. And I think Highsmith captures that psychology so well, is that there's an element of competition and admiration in every male relationship. And when there's a woman involved, quite often there's competition over her, as there is in this case. And it's often about the men rather than the woman. It's sort of, and I think that's something Patricia Highsmith captured so brilliantly. But for me, it was really, I just think all human beings have weaknesses and frailties, and this ugliest side that is competing with what's dignified and good about us. And I love books and characters which have those contradictions in them. And I don't know if that's necessarily a theme, but it's certainly what excited me about this book and most of the books I loved after.
This is such an old-fashioned mystery thriller. It's so refreshing. It really reminds us that the mystery has really kind of gone out of cinema to a large degree. It's mainly on TV that we see mysteries.
Well, I think there's I think those, like you said, TV suddenly made us realise that I think you can tell stories and focus on storytelling. And I think with movies, it's I think because there's so much money involved, especially in the big budget ones, that people are, there's fear and there's this constant desire for speed and turning things into a ride rather than necessarily a story. And it's kind of great to work on this level of budget, because there isn't that same mad pressure that you get on the big studio movies.
You certainly are exercising a lot of muscles in terms of your relationship with an audience. The idea of suspense, of holding shots, of being careful where you edit to build tension.
Well, that was something I went back and looked at a lot of movies of the 60s and a lot of the classical cinema, and I sort of, one of the things that the first book I read that made me want to get into films was the Truffaut book, Interviews with Hitchcock, and it was the first book I read that made me realise that almost every shot has a story purpose, and that you have to sort of think quite carefully about, like you said, holding a shot or when you edit and things like that. They're all contributing to storytelling rather than just random. So I sort of tried to learn as much, especially as a first-time filmmaker. I tried to watch as many films of the period as I could, partly to keep the illusion of the 60s, but also to sort of almost choose a simplistic shooting style to allow three brilliant actors, I think, the space to do what they do without too much sort of interference.
Well, you've been wanting to make this adaptation for over 20 years.
Yeah,
since you were at university.
Absolutely.
What's the hold on this particular book?
Well, it was almost like you were describing. It's the characters, and the characters had the same hold on me. I read the book, and I couldn't, get those characters out of my head, and I sort of left university thinking I could turn it into a film and realize how hard it is to make films. And 5 years later, I picked up the book again, and the characters were different to how I remembered them, but still fascinating. And that kind of continued for 25 years. And as I grew older, they spoke to me in different ways. But I think that's the sign of a good book, is you just can't get it out of your head. And I kept going back trying to get it made into film.
When adapting books, is it the case that you need to focus on appealing to people who have not read the book rather than those who have?
I think absolutely, because I think you can't expect everyone, particularly with this book, which is not a particularly well-known book of Highsmith. I can't, you have to assume they haven't read it, and also, what I think is important adapting is I think the person who's adapting my experience of reading it and what almost the pleasure I had when I read it and what I felt and how it moved me and how I imagined the scene and which bits I skipped over because they were boring. And I think that's the joy of adapting. Is it's that very intimate relationship between a reader and a book, and I try to capture that when I adapt a book, and assume audiences haven't read it.
Is there a joy in taking to the book and tearing into it, annihilating dialogue, reshaping things?
I mean, quite honestly, no, because I feel a real responsibility to the writer. Now, that doesn't mean I don't do any of the things that you just described, but I do it, at least I convince myself that I do it, because that author has given me kind of fantastic characters to work with, and I know those characters, so he or she has drawn them so brilliantly that I feel that I can then invent new scenes or change this or change that and still be true to those characters that they're created. And that's what I always look for in a book, is if I kind of fall in love with the characters, then I think, God, they could go anywhere, I can change anything, and yet it's still respectful to the author whose book I'm adapting.
Now, you're a well-respected, veteran, Oscar-nominated screenwriter. Why would you then do something so crazy as to want to direct a feature film?
Well, this one I wanted to direct long before I'd even had a screenplay kind of turned into a movie. So it was this constant obsession the whole way through, and it wasn't that I sort of had, I'd really enjoyed working with the directors I've worked with, but with this particular book, again, it was going back to the characters. I sort of felt I understood them and related to them, and don't know what it says about me, but even though they're criminals doing terrible things, I sort of really love these characters.
Did your move into the director's chair have anything to do with frustration?
No, it was no, because in a way the last experience I'd had, which had been on Drive, had been a fantastic experience. So I felt very, there have been things I've worked on where it hasn't turned out exactly how I'd wanted, if I'm being completely honest, but no, it was more about, I think you have to feel you can do it, and I felt confident enough that I understood this story and these characters to be able to tell actors, how I felt, and tell my crew what I wanted, which is, to start off from a place of confidence is really important, I think, when you're directing a first film.
As a screenwriter, you have a lot of films to your credit. How important is it to make the distinction between getting the credit for a screenplay and being responsible for what ends up on the screen?
It's such a tough question. It's a great question, because I've had moments of despair where I've turned to my brother and gone, he's probably the person I confide in the most. I said, God, I wish I'd never taken, if it was like a script doctoring job where I didn't necessarily need to take a credit, I did. I was going, God, for all the money I got paid for it, I wish my name wasn't on it. And that's something, as I've grown older, I feel less like that, because I sort of feel, in a way, how a film turns out is so out of the control of the screenwriter to a certain extent. There are so many elements that kind of intervene between the script and then the final product. And also I feel it's wrong to blame other people when something doesn't work. So I think I need to man up and take responsibility for the bad films as well.
Well, something obviously happened with 47 Ronin.
Absolutely. I haven't seen the finished film because I read the reviews.
Do you have just a one-line comment about that?
I didn't. The version I didn't have a dragon in it.
Are film critics right to comment on the quality of a script when they see a film?
Well, I don't think they have a choice, because I think in a way, it's your job. I guess as a critic, it's the critic's job not to bear in mind what has happened to the script, who's changed it, what interference has happened. I think, but as someone on the inside, I mean, I know that, an executive on the day can suddenly change the line, and you get, as a screenwriter, you get blamed for that, or something is changed, or a scene is dropped, and there's so much that happens to a script. I mean, I personally always, when I read a review where the screenwriter is attacked, I sort of think, oh, what could have happened? It could have been because of this or because of that. And usually, for a script to get turned into a movie, it can't be that bad. So something has to have happened in the process.
It does seem a little unfair sometimes when you hear later on that a screenplay has been mangled or chopped or changed or whatever. Yet you read the review and, half the blame is being poured on the screenwriter. You're saying that that's a fair get.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily fair, but I don't see how a critic can do it otherwise. I mean, I think if every critic says, well, we don't know what happened to the screenplay, then you're not judging. I mean, all you can really judge is the finished thing, and so I totally accept it when I get a bad review for something that I feel I didn't necessarily write or was changed. It's part of the job.
You were born in Iran, and you lived there until you were 11, 12 years old?
Yeah.
Now, Iran is always in the news.
Yeah.
You're a filmmaker. Are you under any pressure, or do you feel compelled to make a film about Iran?
I don't, because I don't have... I mean, what I could make a film about is the experience of being an Iranian immigrant in London, because that's what I know. But I think there are Iranian filmmakers who are living in Iran and I think can capture that and tell their story, much better than I can. I mean, I think I can only tell my exiled Iranian version of it. So I don't feel compelled, in a sense, to go back to Iran and make a film about it, because I just don't feel I've experienced the 30 years of revolution that they all have.
Is it also true that Iranians really love Hollywood films?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, even everyone would describe somebody as looking like the Iranian Clark Gable, or the Iranian Marilyn Monroe or something, and I think that probably still, there's a real mad movie culture there.
With Drive,
yeah.
There seem to be a lot of unacknowledged parallels with the 1978 Walter Hill film Driver.
Yeah.
Was that there?
It was there, but I think things like, for example, I lifted, I borrowed, was inspired by, I'd say, Thief and The Samurai much more than Driver. I mean, it was definitely there, but I think I definitely had stronger kind of neo-noir influences when I wrote the script.
Yeah.
I love the Walter Hill movie, but I kind of love the Michael Mann movie and the Melville movie more.
What's next for you? Are you going to write a screenplay, or are you going to direct another film?
I'll probably end up doing some, maybe writing a TV pilot next, because I'm just really fascinated by that form. But I would look, if the film does okay and I get a chance to write and direct again, I'm desperate to do it. But I'm also very keen to write for other directors.
Right.
It's whatever the story is.